Have you ever been to Japan, for example, that big, booming city where skyscrapers grow like mushrooms after the rain? Welcome to Hiroshima. Which Hiroshima, you ask? After all, Hiroshima is. Well, okay, here's another Japanese city of Nagasaki. What do you think? And Nagasaki too. Maybe today's residents of these cities have been deliberately misled, and they know nothing about the danger? Maybe we should urgently inform the Japanese that they live in a deadly radiation zone? But before we call the emergency ministry, let's remember what we know about radiation in general. These are fairly common properties of matter. The sun is something like a giant hydrogen bomb, which emits photons in a wide range, ions, as well as gamma rays, that is radiation. Forces heating the Earth from within, also called the core of the Earth, may have to do with the nuclear decay of heavy transuranic elements. Radiation is emitted by soil, living bodies, and some medical devices. It turns out that radiation is all around us and enters our bodies. Sometimes you can hear the phrase, natural radioactive background, where it is only 0.015 milliroentgen per hour, and where it is 10 times greater and is also considered natural. However, it is more likely that the high levels of radioactive radiation in nature are as natural as the natural content of heavy metals in the bodies of water that ooze the products of the factories. Imagine what would happen if 209 nuclear warheads with a total yield of about 250 megatons were detonated on the territory of Russia. However, how will you feel about the official data according to which exactly this number of nuclear shells bombed the Soviet Union from 1949 to 1963? Here is the American bomb nicknamed the Baby, which was dropped on Hiroshima on August 9, 1945, and now multiply this bomb by 16,600 times. That is the total power of the strike on the USSR from 49 to 63 of the last century. It is as if the British fired their entire nuclear arsenal of 160 warheads into the unpopulated areas of the Soviet Union. How is that possible? Soviet nuclear tests took place at two major test sites, Semipalatinsk and Novaya Zemlya. For example, the Semipalatinsk test site, which was and still is located in a fairly populated area, although logically it should have been located almost at the North Pole, or somewhere in Siberia. By the time of the explosion of the one test nuclear bomb, there was a brand new curatorial city at a distance of 60 kilometers. In 1954, 80 kilometers from the test site, there was another city, Chagan. Imagine you live in one of these cities, go out to the balcony to breathe in fresh morning air, and suddenly there is a flash. What is it? A thunderstorm. Your wife will ask, they are testing nuclear bombs again. Really? What's wrong? And no panic. About hundreds of atmospheric, i.e. non-underground nuclear and thermonuclear charges of different capacities from 1 kiloton to several megatons, with average frequency once a month. Even a super small charge of 1 kiloton yields a characteristic nuclear mushroom of a height of about 3 kilometers, and 1 megaton yields a mushroom of a height of 19 kilometers. The ground nuclear explosions at the Semipalatinsk test site had a total yield of about 100 megatons. If all these shells were detonated simultaneously, a 240 by 240 km square area would receive a lethal radiation shock of 30 sieverts. For comparison, a person with a dose of only 0.05 sievert is already considered to have been exposed to radiation. The fact that the atomic bombs were not detonated all at once, but in strictly dosed doses with a time difference, makes these explosions much less dangerous, including in terms of radioactive radiation. Everyone knows since school age that the Earth after a nuclear explosion is uninhabitable and even deadly. The use of water from the affected area will also, at a minimum, lead to terrible irradiation and genetic modifications of the organism. And at the most it will lead to an excruciating death. But this is all theory, and what about practice? On many continents you can see here and there huge, perfectly round hollows and lakes that suspiciously resemble funnels from powerful explosions. For example, one of such lakes called Chagan. Here, back in Soviet times, cattle come to drink water. The lake is like a lake. In reality, it's a real radioactive crater, which was formed in 1965 as a result of explosion of a 170 kiloton thermonuclear device, put down a hole 178 meters deep in the small river Chagan, not far from Semipalatin's test site. At the end of 1990s, radioactive contamination of water in the lake was estimated at 350 picuries, while the maximum permissible level of water pollution by total radioactivity of alpha particles is 15 picuries. Nevertheless, the lake has been used as a watering hole for cattle for all these years. In 50 years, no lesions have been detected in the animals or shepherds. In this case, we can accurately verify the cause of the lake perfectly round, which cannot be said about other, seemingly perfectly natural lakes and craters of the same ideal geometric shape. And here are the places of the terrible catastrophe, the explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Google Mobile 360 footage from 2017 shows that people are gradually returning to the city, stores are opening, there are rare passers-by on the streets. Many did not leave these places immediately after the explosion, at least until the photo shows people with 2 heads, 3 legs and so on. In general, life goes on. It goes on in the Japanese cities with a hell of a past, Fukushima and Nagasaki, and these cities are more technologically advanced than most Russian cities, which have never been nuked. As for aerial nuclear explosions from 30 to 50 meters above the ground, in these cases most of the radioactive isotopes are released high into the atmosphere. These microparticles then disperse and contaminate a huge space, sometimes on a planetary scale. From the stratosphere, the isotopes don't fall out at all until several years later. Therefore, given the weather conditions, it is relatively safe to work at such a test site. A colossal batch of isotopes of heat and dust, released into the upper atmosphere as a result of the explosion of 530 nuclear charges, could not but affect the climate and the natural radioactive background. Many of those who lived through the 1960s noted that winters were warmer and summers cooler during that period. Some modern researchers have turned to the study of such phenomena as the annual rings of trees, because it was from the 60s that the summer growth of trees slowed down, which is reflected in the thickness of the annual rings. In 1963, the nuclear powers have agreed, now atomic bombs will be tested only underground. Apparently, the leaders of the states realized the serious consequences for the climate of such dabbling with nuclear weapons. But does it change the matter much? Because the tragedy at Focus was triggered precisely by an underground nuclear explosion, but we will tell about it another time. A video about it will soon appear on our channel. And now let us remember this: in the first half of the 20th century, when radioactivity was little known, radium and thorium were considered to be medicinal. They were added to medicine, ointments, cosmetics, such as face cream powder from radioactive materials, and even a kind of activator for water. When radium was put in water overnight, and in the morning they drank it, thinking it was now very useful. What would happen to a person if they ingested small doses, radium-226 and radium-228, mixed with distilled water? Almost certainly you would answer that they would not live long, and death would be painful. For example, Radithor pills. Just one of these pills irradiated a person by about 1 microcurie. To drink such pills was considered useful, while no mass deaths of sudden radiation sicknesses were observed. As they say, one needs a measure in everything. Meanwhile, the Radithor pill became famous because in 1932 it killed Ebenezer McBurney Byers, an American athlete who only for 2 years drank about 1,400 bottles of this, so to speak, panacea, getting a radiation dose 3 times larger than fatal. As a result, after 3 years of taking these pills, he lost all of his teeth, part of his jaw, his bones became unreal soft. In the end, after another 2 years, Byers died. And the use of radiation in medicine began with the fact that scientists have determined that cancer cells in the larynx and at an early stage can be suppressed by radioactive radiation in a small dose, and side effects allegedly will not be observed. This method of treatment of cancer and is used in medicine to this day. Another telling example is the construction of the very first nuclear reactor F1 on the Eurasian continent under the leadership of the father of the Soviet atomic bomb, Igor Vasilievich Kurchatov. But the most interesting thing is that the reactor itself was several times assembled and disassembled by hand. Literally, small cylinders of radioactive metal were inserted into graphite blocks, virtually with bare hands, without any special protection. Nuclear physicists will probably say in comments that F1 was the so-called zero-power reactor, that is very small power not requiring cooling, and nuclear fuel of modern nuclear power plants is much more powerful and lethal. True, there are still cranks who walk around in special protection, consisting of one helmet. So what is radiation? Is it as dangerous as the vast majority thinks? Meet Galen Winsor, one of the greatest nuclear physicists of his time. Let's hear what he has to say.
I'm Galen Winsor, and I thought I'd share a few hands-on practical things that have to do with this nuclear scare scam. Now, you've heard that gamma energy, the kind of energy that comes off a rock like this, is the most penetrating, most damaging of all radiation. And not only that, here is uranium, the parent of radon, and they say if you can detect radon in a home, then it's bad. If you exceed the EPA's limit, it's reason to run you out of your home. Spend $13,000 like they did with Stanley Watrous' house in Pennsylvania the other day to get rid of the radon, to ventilate it out through. Ridiculous. Let's take them one at a time. This is a rock that I picked up in Natarita, Colorado. 16 weight percent uranium. High-grade uranium. Hot. I read a thing the other day that says they had high-grade uranium, and lo and behold, it's too hot to transport, so they had to bury it on site. Oh, wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about radiation. If we can, yeah, are we picking up? If you put the probe right there, the meter goes off scale, and you can hear it, all right? Hot. Radiation, gamma radiation is the most penetrating of all radiation. Oh, is it? All it's got between the rock and the probe is my hand. Doesn't count so pretty much, does it? What if I put the rock behind me? You don't suppose they've been lying to you, do you? I suspect they have. Well, let's do a little bit more. I got a black bottle. This stuff comes in white bottle. A bottle of no-dose. You can send children down to the drugstore to buy no-dose. All they need is money. In this are 660 white caffeine pellets. In this one is uranium oxide, U3O8. You can't buy it for love nor money. The state of Washington sent 2 of their Gestapo agents over to my home to confiscate my uranium samples on the 17th of December last year. Got a challenge. I'd like to have somebody in the room volunteer to take all of this bottle or all of this bottle. The only thing that I'll tell you is that one of them won't hurt you and the other one will kill you. Do you want the white stuff or the black stuff? White stuff? You do. There's enough in there to kill 4 men your size. The government says we got to ban this material. It's radioactive. Let's check it in the bottom of the bottle. Not very radioactive. Let's take the cap off. Oh goodness, very radioactive. This instrument will only count gamma, energy. It's just energy. Light's coming from those lights, only you're getting lots of infrared from the lights as well as ultraviolet. Energy response, and it's very carefully damped to only discriminated so it only gets the energy that comes from this. I don't want it to respond to a light, just to this. Cost me $1,000 to get an instrument that will just respond to this and not to that. This is radioactive by any definition. Radioactive material giving off radiation that is read by an instrument like this. The daughter of this, radon, cannot be read on this instrument because it gives off alpha particles. An alpha particle is a dye-positive particle that comes from the nucleus. It has 2 protons and 2 neutrons, therefore an atomic weight of 4, and it's minus 2 electrons. And if you grab it with a high ionization potential counter, it'll count. But if it travels 2 inches in air or through a piece of paper, it picks up 2 electrons, 2 beta particles, if you will, and becomes helium gas, and it won't count on an ionization chamber. Did you know that this thing right here is giving off helium gas? Alpha comes from uranium. Okay, radioactive material. You pour it out in the hand, and that's radioactive contamination. Is it radioactive? Yeah, it is. Very radioactive. Now, decontamination is nothing but scooping it back up and putting it into the bottle. I just now decontaminated my hand. No, I didn't do such a good job. Not good at all. Is it still radioactive? Yeah, that's called residual radioactivity. Now, under the decontamination rules of the government, when you decontaminate somebody like this that's that contaminated, and this is certainly a reportable incident under current DOE regulations, when you decontaminate him, it has to go down a controlled drain so that you don't disperse radioactivity. Do I qualify as a controlled drain? That material that I just ate is not soluble in body fluids.
If you have any ideas, write them in the comments. If you think this video is worthy of your likes, thank you for your evaluation. And we're done for today, until we meet again.